Now let's take some time to focus on the city of Florence in particular, the birthplace of the Renaissance and the Athens of its time. Here you can see the Apennine Mountains off in the distance, and you can see such noted landmarks as the Florence Cathedral there in the center with Brunelleschi's dome, and you can see the Palazzo Vecchio right here, which is kind of like the town hall in the city of Florence, and this looks like the Ponte Vecchio here. The Ponte Vecchio is just a very old, very beautiful bridge, and in the 1400s, the city of Florence came under the rule of the Medici family. The Medicis were strong patrons of the arts, and Florence then became the birthplace of the Renaissance. When they conquered other city-states, they became a republic. The first city they conquered was the city of Pisa in 1406. So Florence was run by what was called the Signoria, which is the governing council of Florence that met here in the Palazzo Vecchio. Guilds, different guilds in the city of Florence, would elect the members of the Signoria. There were 9 members in total, and these people proposed laws and handled foreign affairs. Citizens that were wealthy enough to pay taxes were elected to a council of the people, roughly 600 to 700 members, as well as the council of the commune, which had to approve the decisions of the Signoria and its major guilds. There were 14 lesser guilds as well. It was a center of education in the 15th century. At least 8,000 children were enrolled in civic or church schools, which is one thing that contributes to the artistic flourishing here. And before the plague of the 1340s, Florence had a population of around 100,000. The city can be divided into roughly 3 classes. You've got the Populo Grossi, which is the elites of the city. In Italian, that means the fat people of the city, but that's nobles, wealthy merchants, and manufacturers, and is roughly 5% of the population. You've got the mediocri, which is the middling sort, and that's smaller merchants and master craftsmen, roughly 10% of the population. And then you have the populo minuto, which are the little people. That's everyone else in the city. Roughly all the peasants and so on and so forth, but roughly 85% of the population of Florence. Wealthy merchants, called grandi, ultimately governed the city, and these merchants, in line with the civic humanism that characterizes Renaissance Italy, wanted to use their money to build up the great city of Florence. Not only would they make their city beautiful, but they would make other cities envy them and their prosperity. So hence, you've got beautiful structures like this, the Florence Cathedral, with its dome designed by Filippo Brunelleschi and consecrated in 1436. Brunelleschi was financially supported by Cosimo de' Medici, whom we're going to look at in just a moment. The dome is modeled after the massive freestanding dome at the Pantheon in Rome, and is the largest brick-built dome of its kind. The Wool Merchants Guild held a contest to see who got the honor of designing and building this massive structure. The man, and this is the contest, the man who can make an egg stand upright on its end would win the commission to build the dome. And everybody in Florence tried to do this. They tried to balance an egg in such a way that they could make it stand like upright at its point on its own. Brunelleschi did this by breaking the egg slightly at its end. And people said, well, if we had broken it, we certainly could have gotten it to stand up too. And Brunelleschi remarked that, well, if you knew my design for the dome, you could see how I'm going to make the most beautiful, freestanding, largest dome of its kind. And it was. The dome of Florence's cathedral is the largest freestanding dome of its kind. It's made of brick, and the dome was built using massive cranes that Brunelleschi had adapted from Roman books on architecture. So again, you can see the classical sources, classical models, and classical ways of building buildings that glorify a city that wants to be Rome. Now, while Florence is a republic, a city in which men are free before the law and treated as equals, in reality, the city of Florence was controlled by one individual, Cosimo de' Medici, and dominated by the Medici family. Cosimo de' Medici was a wealthy banker, patron, primus inter pares, the first among equals, and the unofficial ruler of Florence. He really becomes the unofficial ruler of Florence from 1434 to his death. When he became a man, he took over the Medici Bank from his father, Giovanni, who founded the bank. Cosimo opened branches in various Italian cities like Venice and Genoa, but the Medici Bank took off thanks to the election of anti-pope John the 23rd. The Medicis had originally loaned him money so that he could buy his cardinalate, and in return, John the 23rd made the Medici Bank the institution that handled nearly all of the papal finances across Europe. His interest in banking and the production of alum, a mineral needed to dye woolen clothing, made Cosimo de' Medici incredibly wealthy. And thanks to this wealth, he was in a position to do many people favors. When you have a profitable, expanding business, you can give people jobs in that business, or you can help them pay their debts. And when you do things like this, you create a network of people who all of a sudden owe you. And there's even a word for this, amici della amici, friends of friends. These were people that had accepted help from Cosimo de' Medici, and now they owed him favors. In terms of running the city behind the scenes, because he's never elected to any particular office, he would manipulate the drawing of lots for public officials, so that only people he could depend on could be chosen to serve in political office. The Bishop of Siena remarked that political questions are settled in Cosimo's house. The man he chooses holds office. He is the person who decides peace and war. He is king in all but name. In regards to that, when Venice was making preparations and alliances to make war on Florence, the Medici family called in so many loans on Venetian citizens that Venice quickly dropped their war. That's insane, that so many people in Venice were indebted to Cosimo that he only needed to call up their debts and they stopped making their preparations for warfare. Cosimo also made an alliance with the Sforza family that was ruling in Milan during this time to help supply him with troops in order to protect Florence further from outside invasions. Now, you may wonder how the Medici family was able to make so much money off of banking, when in the Middle Ages, usury was outlawed. Usury is the charge of the use of an interest rate. So when you loan someone money, they not only have to pay you back the loan, but have to pay you back 10% of the value of the loan. That way, you make money just letting somebody borrow money that you wouldn't have otherwise spent. During the Middle Ages, this is outlawed, and you can't do this. This is why Jewish moneylenders, this is one of the only jobs that was available to them, because this particular job was cut off from any of the Catholic Christians living in Europe. The Pope decreed that usury is against the law and that you couldn't do it. So most people in Europe are not engaging in any sort of banking on this scale. The way that the Medici family got around this is by taking advantage of the differences in foreign currency. So perhaps the value might fluctuate after they'd given out a loan, and they would make money depending on the amount of fluctuation in the currency and things like that. Now, this is the Palazzo Medici. It's the palace built for Cosimo de' Medici, and this would be the house mentioned by the Bishop of Siena, where he would decide many of the significant issues of his day in his own home. During his lifetime, Cosimo de' Medici founded the Medici Library at the Church of San Marco, and here he paid scholars and manuscript hunters to find manuscripts, to copy them, and to comment on them. He supported artists like Fra Angelico and Donatello, not the Ninja Turtle, but the prominent Renaissance sculptor, as well as philosophers like Marsilio Ficino, sorry. Mi dispiace. My Italian is not as good as it once was. Marsilio Ficino is a Neoplatonist, so this is a figure that is trying to revive the writings and philosophy of Plato, as well as the architect Brunelleschi, who we looked at just a few slides ago. Cosimo de' Medici employed 200 scribes to copy 200 volumes of important works over 1-2 year period. Also, when he brought an ecumenical council to come to Florence, it attracted Byzantine scholars into the city. And later, they'll end up teaching Greek at the University of Florence. So here, in Cosimo de' Medici, you get a very good sense of how the wealth of Florentine bankers was able to kickstart the Renaissance. His money pays for scholars to do their work. They're not just going to do that sort of stuff on their own. Plus, with this money, you enable many, many more people to get involved in the work of copying manuscripts and commenting on them. So this is one of those areas where the Renaissance is able to get its start from the incredible wealth that's coming into Italy thanks to commerce and banking. And here's Lorenzo de' Medici, who lives from 1449 to 1492. He's the grandson of Cosimo, the head of the Medici Bank, a prominent supporter of Florentine arts and culture, and he's got the title Il Magnifico. And he's also a diplomat, somebody who's committed to maintaining the balance of power in Italy and maintaining peace. Lorenzo succeeded his grandfather Cosimo as leader of the Medici Bank and the unofficial ruler of Florence. Many people labeled him as a tyrant, but he paid for carnivals, balls, pageants, jousts, libraries, and artists. He was very famously denounced by a friar named Girolamo Savonarola, who even ended up ousting Lorenzo de' Medici from power in Florence. Also, during Lorenzo's lifetime, he supported artists like Botticelli and Michelangelo, and he was even an accomplished poet himself. Lorenzo survived an assassination attempt inside the Duomo, the Santa Maria del Fiore, the main cathedral of Florence, which we had seen just a little while ago. But there's a photo of it in case you need it. The assassination was ordered by Pope Sixtus IV and the Archbishop of Pisa at the behest of a rival banking firm called the Pazzi family. And this is called the Pazzi conspiracy. He survived the assassination attempt, and then he had all the perpetrators hung for days from the Palazzo Vecchio, the old courthouse in Florence, including the Archbishop. He also managed to negotiate a peace with Naples, whose Spanish king had backed the papal states, so that Florence was somewhat free and prosperous. He died at 43, and his son Giovanni de' Medici will become Pope Leo X. But here's just another example of the wealth and the wealth generated by commerce and banking in Italy during the Renaissance, and figures like Lorenzo de' Medici intentionally supporting scholars, manuscript hunters, manuscript copyists, in order to increase the supply of knowledge available to figures in the Renaissance.